The sun over Rose Creek beat down with a cruel vengeance, bleaching the red dust into something almost holy. The Founders' Day Festival was in full swing, ribbons, dancing in the wind fiddle tunes, slicing through the air, laughter rising like smoke from a fire. But none of that joy reached Mary Beth Calloway. She stood at the edge of the wooden platform outside the town hall, her breath shallow, arms at her sides, thick hands clenched into trembling fists. The crowd gathered not to celebrate, but to watch the sheriff finish what had started as a whisper and festered into a full-blown execution of pride. Sheriff Cole Madden, tall as a pine and just as unbending, stood before her with a crooked sneer. His silver badge glinted like a dagger in the light. "Mary Beth," he drawled, voice slow as molasses, but sharp enough to draw blood. "The town council has voted. You're no longer welcome here." The words came like buckshot. Gasps flitted through the crowd like startled birds. Mary Beth didn't flinch. Not when Cole dropped her mother's brooch into the dust at her feet. Not when old Widow Granger turned away with a shake of her head. Not even when little Billy Tucker, barely 10 years old, laughed and called her a cow. "You gonna say anything?" Cole prodded. She looked at him, slow and deliberate, with eyes the color of burnt sugar and full of storm. "No," she said. She knelt in silence, lifted the brooch from the dirt, wiped it clean on the hem of her dress. Her fingers lingered on it for a moment, her face unreadable. Then she turned, skirt swishing like a banner in retreat, and walked through the crowd that parted with the unease of those watching a funeral procession. She heard them whisper words like lazy, too big, takes up too much. Not one hand reached for her. Not one mouth asked her to stay. Out beyond the town's edge, the sound of merriment faded. Her mule pickle waited by the old fence post, already saddled with the few belongings she owned: clothes, needles, some torn fabric swatches, and a copy of Little Women she'd read, cover to cover, until the spine cracked. She mounted without grace, but with firm resolve. The sun blistered her skin. Dust clung to the sweat on her brow. She didn't cry. Not when the church bell rang in cruel celebration behind her. Not when the bitter wind rose, catching the fabric of her dress like sails against a storm. She was born in Rose Creek, orphaned at 7, when the fire took her parents and half their dry goods store. Raised by Aunt Esther, who believed that a girl could be whatever she wanted until sickness and sorrow made her whisper otherwise. Beth had survived on grit, calloused hands, and thick skin, literally and otherwise. She was 12 when they called her Big Beth. 14 when the boys started daring each other to dance with her for a joke. 16 when she caught 2 girls laughing behind her in church and heard the words barn-sized like a slap across the soul. But she'd never begged for acceptance. Not once. She made her own dresses, stitched them from scraps with hands so skilled even the mayor's wife once asked her to sew a hem, though she later claimed she'd done it herself. Beth had a dream once, a small shop tucked between the saloon and the barber filled with velvet lace, and her own name carved above the door. But dreams in Rose Creek came with caveats. You had to be the right shape, the right sound, the right kind of woman. She wasn't, and now she was gone. The plains opened wide before her, the horizon stretching into possibility and peril. The silence out here was not the cruel kind, it was patient, like the land was watching, waiting to see what she'd do. By sundown, her hands were blistered from the rains, her throat dry as cotton. She made camp by a scraggly patch of mesquite, built a small fire, and sat cross-legged while Pickle gnawed on grass nearby. She held the brooch close, let the metal warm in her palm. It was shaped like a magnolia, her mother's favorite flower, though it never grew in this dust-choked land. The night deepened. Coyotes howled in the distance. She watched the firelight flicker and thought not for the first time about whether there was something truly wrong with her. Not just her size, but the core of her, the parts people didn't see and judged anyway. A branch snapped. Beth froze, hand creeping to the small pistol in her satchel. Another snapped closer this time. Her heart pounded in her ears. She didn't shout, didn't call for help. She rose silently, gun in hand, eyes scanning the darkness. Then she saw it, a rattlesnake coiled beside a rock, eyes gleaming in the firelight. She didn't scream. She didn't flinch. One breath, one clean shot. The echo rolled across the flat land like thunder. The snake's body twitched once, then stilled. Beth sat down slowly, breath catching in her throat. From a hilltop beyond her firelight, a figure on horseback watched. A man with a wide-brimmed hat and a face half hidden in shadow. He didn't speak, didn't move, just watched. Clayton Briggs had seen a lot of things in his life. Men break horses, die towns, rot from the inside. But he'd never seen a woman face a snake like that without blinking. He said nothing, just turned his horse and rode back into the night. Beth never knew he'd been there. She poked at the fire until the flames danced higher, a soft light flickering in her tired eyes. "I won't cry for them," she whispered, "not one damn tear." Then, because there was nothing else to do, she laid down beneath the stars, her head on a saddlebag, the gun close at hand, the brooch pressed tight against her chest. She fell asleep to the sound of the wind whispering across the plains, like it was carrying secrets only the wild could know. And the land listened. By the second morning, Mary Beth's legs ached like she'd been trampled by a dozen stampedes. Her hands were raw, eyes sunburnt, and her mule was grumpier than ever. Pickle had no interest in heading anywhere but back toward town. Beth tugged the reins gently, not begging, but bargaining. "Ain't no future behind us," she muttered. "You want apples again? We go forward." They crested a low rise and found the fence just before sunrise. Rusted barbed wire stretched in jagged lines, half buried in tumbleweed. Beyond it lay a battered ranch, part ghost town, part stubborn miracle. The main house stood with one side caved in, the barn listing like a drunkard, the corral empty. And still smoke curled from a chimney. Beth squinted into the low light. Someone lived here. Her knees threatened to buckle, but she stepped forward, Pickle dragging behind. A shot rang out, not close but not far. A warning. She froze, then raised one hand slowly and called out, her voice rough as gravel. "Ain't here to steal. Ain't here to beg. Just need water." Silence. Then out of the haze a figure emerged. He moved like a man who knew his land boots, silent steps sure. Tall, sun-leathered, lean, his hat shadowed most of his face, but the jawline was cut from the same stone as the hills behind him. A rifle rested easy in his hand, not aimed, but not idle. She didn't lower her hand. "Mary Beth Calloway. Most folks call me Big Beth. You can too if you're feeling cruel or lazy." The corner of his mouth twitched. "Clayton Briggs. That's your bullet, just the noise." "The bullet's in a stump." "Fair enough." He looked her over like a rancher would a storm cloud trying to figure if it'd bring rain or ruin. "You're far from town. They asked me to leave." Loudly, thought I'd listen. She saw his eyes flicker. Not pity. Crazle. "You hurt. Only in the places I can't stitch." He nodded once. "Got a pump by the barn. You're welcome to water. That mule looks about 5 minutes from Keeling." Beth followed, too proud to limp. By noon she'd had her fill of well water, rinsed her face, and let Pickle drink until his ears twitched with pleasure. She was ready to move on when Briggs handed her a tin cup filled with coffee and gestured toward a tree stump like it was the finest chair in the house. "You any good with a hammer?" Beth arched a brow. "Better with a needle. Got fences to mend, chickens to undam. If you're looking for work, I got it. Not charity, not favors. Pays food and a roof." She took the cup, let the steam sting her lips. "You don't know me," she said. "I know the kind of person who walks the prairie alone and doesn't flinch at a warning shot." She nodded once. "Then I reckon I'll stay." The first week was fire and splinters. Beth pulled wire till her arms felt torn from the socket. She chased chickens with a fury that made Clayton chuckle from the porch. He was a man of few words, but each one landed like a nail in hard oak. Solid, thoughtful, precise. She rebuilt the hen house, stitched new curtains from feed sacks, and turned a half-rotten cart into a storage bin. Her hands bled nightly. Her muscles screamed. But she didn't complain, not once. And when the ranch hands, 3 rough-spoken men who tolerated Clayton's odd ways, made their jokes, Beth gave it right back. On the 4th night, when one of them, a wiry man named Jude, bet she couldn't ride the bull in the outer pen, Beth climbed over the fence barefoot and grinned like sin. 10 seconds, Jude said, spitting tobacco. "Make it 15, Beth fired back. The bull tossed her by 12, but she landed on her feet, dusted off, and bowed. Jude paid up without a word. Even Clayton cracked a smile. But it wasn't all laughs. The land was brutal. Coyotes took 2 hens. A spring wagon shattered an axle. Beth stitched up a calf with one hand while holding the lantern with the other. At night her shoulders burned and her ribs ached, But there was something in her chest that had been missing for years, a low, steady thrum of belonging. One evening under a sky bruised with dusk, Beth found herself alone in the barn. She stood staring at an old photograph nailed to a support beam. A young boy, maybe 12, holding a baby goat with a lopsided grin. The edges were curled, weathered. Clayton's voice came from the doorway, low and quiet. "That was my brother. Died before his voice even cracked." Beth didn't turn. "I had a brother too. Lasted 5 days. Buried him in a shoebox." She looked at her hands. "I've stitched so many things, clothes curtains, even saddle straps. Never fixed a person though." "Not really." Clayton stepped beside her. "Some people don't break clean. Can't just patch them up." She nodded. "Sometimes I think I wasn't made to be loved. Not in the way others are." Silence swelled between them, heavy but not cruel. The next morning she found a new wooden workbench set up beside the barn. Tools she hadn't seen before. Needles, fabrics, a spool of fine thread. No note, no speech. Just a gift. She ran her fingers along the smooth wood, eyes stinging. She didn't say thank you. Didn't have to. Trouble came 3 days later, riding on a crooked horse and carrying a shotgun like a second limb. Jed Crane, mouthful of rot and venom, led 3 men up the trail toward Dead Horse Hollow like they were coming for a funeral. Clayton was out by the fields. Beth stood on the porch, shotgun propped at her hip. She didn't blink when Crane tipped his hat. "Afternoon," he said with the oily smile of a man who'd never earned a straight day's work. "Didn't know you'd hired new help." Beth didn't return the smile. "New help can shoot too." Crane's eyes slid over her frame, not with desire, but disdain. "Gutsy for a," he paused, cocking his head, "for a woman your density." Beth didn't flinch. She just shifted the shotgun slightly. "You want to finish that sentence, or do you want to keep all your teeth?" Jude and the others appeared behind her, quiet but ready. Crane's smirk faltered. "Tell your boss I'll be back. The land's not his to keep. Railroad's buying, and they don't care about squatters or sad cows." "Tell him yourself," Beth said, "and bring flowers for your grave." Crane spat near her boots and rode off, but not fast. He wasn't done. Later, Clayton sat at the table, hands clasped like he was praying to the wood grain. "They want the land for track lines. He's right about the railroad, but wrong if he thinks I'll run." Beth set down a plate of stew. "We don't run." He looked at her, and for the first time, something in his gaze cracked. "You don't owe me this fight." She pulled a chair out, sat down. "Maybe not, but I've never had land worth bleeding for, never had a name worth keeping. Now I've got both." He said nothing, but he smiled just enough. That night the wind kicked up hard. Beth couldn't sleep. She walked the ranch, checked the fence lines, counted chickens, whispered to Pickle. She paused at the edge of the property, looked out toward Rose Creek far beyond the hills. She thought of the people who'd cast her out, how small their world seemed now. Inside her something shifted. Not anger, not revenge, just a quiet resolve. No one was going to take this from her. Not again. Back in the barn, she stitched a new banner for the fence gate. A small thing, scrap fabric sewn tight. 2 words, bold and steady: Ironheart Ranch. She stood in the doorway as dawn rose, her silhouette framed by amber light. The land had tested her. She wasn't done yet. The fire started at the edge of the eastern pasture, where the wind slid through the dry grass like a whispered curse. Beth smelled it before she saw it, an acrid coil of smoke that didn't belong in the late spring air. She dropped the feed sack where she stood and sprinted toward the ridge. The flames leapt like dancers drunk on madness, orange teeth, devouring fence posts, paint-chipped rails, and wild scrub. Behind her the barn bell clanged, Jude ringing the alarm. Chickens, scattered horses, neighed in panic, and the earth itself seemed to tremble under the weight of it. Backsides lit too. Boone yelled, his voice hoarse as he galloped by on horseback, hats snatched by the wind. "We're boxed in." Beth didn't freeze. She moved like the fire was chasing her shadow. She kicked open the water barrels, grabbed a shovel, and started slapping down embers before they kissed the barn walls. Her sleeves scorched. Her boots smoked. She didn't stop. Not when her hands blistered. Not when her lungs begged. She caught sight of Clayton hauling water by the troughs, soaked to the chest, face blackened with soot. He saw her too and nodded once. No words, just grit. "Crane," she shouted over the roar. He didn't answer, but his eyes said enough. This wasn't nature. This was a warning. Beth grit her teeth so hard her jaw ached. They wanted her to run, to leave the land charred and broken and head back to where the small-minded whispered her name like a curse. But this ranch had her blood in the dirt now, and blood made things sacred. Hours later, the fire died down with the stars rising like pale spectators overhead. They stood in the ash-streaked silence, the survivors of yet another test. Only half the fence remained. The shed was gone. One mare had bolted and not come back. Beth sat on an overturned bucket, coughing, smoke fingers, raw and blackened. "They'll come again," Jude said quietly, crouching beside her. Beth looked toward the hills. "Let them. They'll find something waiting." Clayton approached with a flask of creek water. He handed it to her without speaking. She drank deeply, then wiped her mouth with her sleeve. "I'm not just staying," she rasped. "I'm fighting." He crouched next to her, leaned in close so only she could hear. "I should have stopped them. Years ago, Crane's been circling like a buzzard since my father passed. You've got the land," she said, "and now they know it has fire in its bones." He looked at her hands, swollen and blackened. "You need to rest. I'll rest when this place has roots deep enough they can't burn through." That night's sleep didn't come easy. Beth sat in the dark lantern, low sewing stitches into torn saddlebags, more for the motion than the need. Her fingers moved from muscle memory, but her mind flicked back to the first time she saw fire. That night the store burned her parents inside. No one remembered it, no one but her. Clayton's footsteps crunched the gravel softly. "You always mend things at midnight," he asked. "Only what matters." He leaned against the post. "They'll come with more than fire next time. Guns, lawyers, men paid not to feel." She nodded. "Let them come. I'm done folding." "You remind me of my mother," he said after a beat. Beth didn't respond. She wasn't sure if it was meant as a compliment. "She didn't talk much either," he added with a half smile. Beth raised an eyebrow. "Funny. You've got jokes after a fire." "Only the good ones survive it," he said. She chuckled, just a breath of it, but it felt real. They worked side by side for the next 3 days, rebuilding what they could. Boone reinforced the barn's roof. Jude scavenged wood from abandoned fence lines. Beth patched gear and cooked meals hearty enough to make grown men cry. Her body ached like she'd swallowed rocks, but she moved with purpose. On the 4th morning, a letter arrived. No name, just to the woman who thinks this land makes her brave. Inside, one line, hand-scrawled in coal-black ink. "Next time we won't warn you." Beth stared at the words for a long time before she handed the note to Clayton. His jaw set hard. "They're scared." "Good," she said. "Fear is a fine thing to serve cold." But something in her chest twisted. Not fear, something older. Something like the echo of rejection, the shadow of every door that had ever slammed in her face. Later that evening, she sat on the porch steps, elbows on her knees, watching the moon claw its way above the pines. The land smelled of ash and sweat and possibility. Clayton joined her quietly, sitting just close enough their shoulders nearly touched. "Why did you come out here?" he asked. "Because there was nothing left back there." He waited, not pushing. "I got tired of being too much for them. Too loud, too wide, too stubborn. I thought maybe the prairie wouldn't mind." "It doesn't," he said. Beth looked over at him, really looked. "No," she said. "It doesn't." The quiet stretched between them, long and kind. He shifted, then asked, "You ever think about going back, proving them wrong?" She shook her head. "That would mean I care what they think. I don't want to change their minds. I want to make sure they never get to change mine again." The next day, she found a paintbrush and the leftover whitewash and walked to the front gate. The wind tugged at her dress, cool and certain. She repainted the sign Ironheart Ranch Boulder clearer. By afternoon, a rider came fast from Rose Creek, dust flying in thick clouds. A boy barely 16, mouth dry and eyes wide. "Miss Calloway?" he asked. Beth stood square. "That's me. Mayor's calling a land claim. Says Dead Horse Hollow is under review for seizure." She felt the words like a weight, but she didn't flinch. "Then I guess I better dress for town." Clayton stepped up beside her, arms folded. "You don't have to go alone." "I do," she said. "They threw me out like trash. I'm going to walk back in like thunder." She turned to the boy. "Tell the mayor I'm coming. And this time I've got more than just boots on my feet." I've got a name. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't need to. The land would keep her breath, her sweat, her fire. As she saddled Pickle, her eyes burned with something sharper than fear. Purpose, rage, pride, all wound into something solid. When she rode toward town, her back was straight, her hair braided tight, her mother's brooch pinned high on her chest like a badge of memory. No more fires from the shadows. Next time she'd bring her own. Beth rode into Rose Creek like a dust storm on legs, her duster coat billowing behind her boots, echoing against the boards of a town that had once spat her out like a bad taste. She didn't hide her face, didn't dip her hat. Her eyes were hard flint shoulders, squared, her revolver resting at her hip. Not for show, not for threat, but as truth. She didn't come to beg. She came to end things. The streets had gone quiet before she even reached the saloon. Eyes peeked through half-drawn curtains. Conversations dried up like water in July. Men who once laughed at her behind whiskey glasses now stepped back like they feared the weight of her shadow. Sheriff Cole Madden was waiting on the porch of the mayor's office, the brim of his hat pulled low, a fresh cigar smoldering between his teeth. He didn't greet her. He looked at her like she was something ancient that had clawed its way out of the ground. Well, he said, voice flat, hell done, froze over. Beth stopped at the steps. Guess you'll need warmer boots. She didn't wait for permission. She walked straight past him, shouldering open the doors to the town hall. Inside the council was gathered 5 men in waistcoats, their bellies full and their eyes narrow. At the head of the table sat Mayor Aldous Pritchard, skin thin as parchment and smile thinner still. He didn't rise. Miss Calloway, he said, pretending at courtesy, didn't expect you back. I never left, she replied. I just found better ground. We've heard rumors, Pritchard said, folding his hands, that you've taken up illegal occupation of the Hollow, that you've been resisting rightful land development, that you've threatened. Beth slapped the deed down on the table like it was a gauntlet. Signed by Clayton Briggs' father, stamped by the territorial office, legal and binding. This land doesn't belong to the railroad, and it sure as hell doesn't belong to you. Pritchard blinked. That land was left unattended. According to code. It was abandoned, not unclaimed, she snapped. We built it back. With our hands. With our blood. You want to call it empty, then I suggest you come dig us up first. A slow hush filled the chamber. Even the sheriff looked away. Pritchard leaned back, his voice icy. You're making enemies. Beth leaned forward, voice low, eyes steady. I've had enemies my whole life. You think one more scares me? A door creaked open at the back. Jed Crane stepped in, his face a mask of smug satisfaction. His coat was dusted in trail dirt, his boots still wet from morning dew, but the pistol on his belt was freshly cleaned. Well, well, he drawled, tipping an imaginary hat. The Queen of Cowland herself. Beth didn't look at him. Come to add arson to your resume. He smiled, all teeth. You've got no proof of that. I've got enough scars to testify. Crane moved closer, his hand inching toward his belt. Maybe you should have stayed in the dirt where we put you. Beth's hand hovered just near her revolver, fingers relaxed. Clayton's voice cracked through the room like a thunderclap. Step away from her, Jed. He stood at the entrance, dust in his hair coat, open boots muddy. No show, just steel, Crane laughed. This your girl now, Briggs? She's her own, Clayton said. But if you lay a finger on her, I'll make sure you never hold a gun again. Big words, Crane muttered. Backed by a big rifle, Clayton replied, stepping forward. Sheriff Madden finally moved, hand raised. Enough. We're not spilling blood on council floors. Pritchard called this. The mayor stood face pale. You want to fight this in the courts, you can. But this meeting is over. Beth didn't move. You've taken everything from people like me, dignity, safety, hope. You pushed me out like I was the plague, and I still didn't break. Her voice rose now, filling the room like thunder. You call me too much, too loud, too strong. But this world was built by people like me, the ones you underestimate, the ones who survive anyway. She stepped back, eyes sweeping over the council like a judge at reckoning. We're not asking anymore. We're claiming. Then she turned and walked out, the silence behind her deeper than any gunshot. Outside, the sun had dropped behind the church steeple, casting long shadows across the square. People were gathering, quiet, hesitant, curious. Word had spread. Rose Creek loved gossip more than grain, and this was a tale they couldn't help but watch unfold. Beth faced them without apology. "I'm not coming back to stay," she said loud enough for all to hear. "I didn't come to ask forgiveness. I came to remind you that I never needed it." A hush, then a voice from the crowd. "Beth." It was Lena Wright. Her voice trembled like her hands, but she stepped forward. "I was wrong," she said. "We all were." Beth didn't blink. "You laughed while they shoved me out." "I was scared of being next," Lena whispered. Beth nodded once. "I know." She didn't offer comfort, just truth. "But I didn't break," she added, "and I'm not small enough to need your approval anymore." Lena stepped back. Others said nothing, but something in the way they looked at her had changed. Not love, not redemption, respect. Clayton fell into step beside her as they walked toward their horses. "You sure you're done here?" he asked. Beth paused, then looked back at the town that had once choked her. "I buried the last of it," she said. They rode out, slow wind brushing their faces, the sky bleeding fire and gold. The plains opened to them like a promise. Ironheart Ranch waited with fences, still broken roofs, still patched chickens, still half wild. But it was theirs. Beth stood on the porch that night, watching the stars take their place. Clayton joined her, holding out a cup of coffee. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. They didn't need to. The land breathed beneath their feet. The fire was out, but the heat remained. Not the kind that destroyed, but the kind that forged. And deep in her chest, Beth knew this truth. She hadn't been cast out. She'd been set free. The world hadn't wanted her in its shape, so she made a new one. Ironheart wasn't just a name, it was who she had become.